The Raptors have been on the losing end of a lot of trades recently. Since 2020, they've acted as a first-round pick farm for the San Antonio Spurs and helped improve not one, but two Eastern Conference opponents. But a move last season shows the Raptors might finally be waking up. The moves the Raptors have made post-championship are really hard to defend, because as much as those trades were just making the best out of bad situations, they did it to themselves. In the wake of the 2019 championship, the Raptors made a habit of selling low and buying high. If that sounds idiotic to you, it's because it is. There are franchises that can afford to lose on value swaps. The Celtics, Lakers, Warriors, Knicks, and Sixers are marquee teams that can stomach a bad trade because they always have free agency as an option to bring talent in the door. The Raptors, on the other hand, don't have that luxury. To remain competitive, every move has to return at least equal value. It's not normal to still be complaining about the 29th pick from 5 years ago not working out, but when perfection is the only route to success, these mistakes get magnified. But last season, there was a noticeable change in the Raptors' approach to player acquisition, one that finally shows they're figuring it out. Back in February at the trade deadline, rumors were swirling that confounded much of the NBA community. The Raptors, who many expected to be in sell mode, were registering interest in a win-now player. Now the Raptors have done this before, a few times actually. The circumstances are slightly different, but on the surface, it's easy to write it off as yet another mistimed move. Toronto was in the first official year of their self-proclaimed rebuild, so potentially moving a future asset for a win-now player drew the ire of every idiot with a microphone. If you weren't actually tapped into the Raptors last season, I don't blame you for being confused by the move. From an outside perspective, the Raptors weren't very good, and when you're not good in the NBA, you tank. And to their credit, the Raptors certainly leaned into that these last two seasons. Unfortunately, despite selling off a few starters, they still had too much talent left on the roster to drop far enough in the odds. Not that it would have mattered. So if the Raptors aren't bad enough to get a high pick, and not good enough to actually compete, what are their options to improve? As I said, free agency is not an option for Toronto, so the only real way to get better is to get back a better player in a trade than you send out. And to do that, Toronto had to drastically change the type of player they target in transactions. Enter Brandon Ingram. For years, the Raptors' MO was lengthy forwards with defensive upside and limited skill set. They spammed this archetype so much that any 6'8 forward would earn the title of being Raptorsy, bonus points if they were African. Brandon Ingram is 6'8, but that's where the similarities end. Early on in his career, he earned the Baby KD moniker for being equally slender and impressively proficient mid-range scorer. Ingram is a pure hooper through and through. A rhythmic, aesthetic handle coupled with fluid shot mechanics make him one of the most enjoyable players to watch in the NBA. But I don't want to focus too much on the player type, because what makes the Brandon Ingram acquisition interesting to me was his situation. A situation that allowed the Raptors access to a player that they typically wouldn't have. Despite his talents, several factors preceding the trade deadline aligned to significantly lower his trade value from what it was a year previous. His expiring contract, his injury history, and his reported inability to agree to terms on a new contract combined to create a situation many front offices saw as too risky. As much as teams love an upside play, risk aversion usually wins out. These factors set the table for the Raptors to make their first buy low trade since the Kawhi deal. The cost? 2 expiring contracts, Indiana's 2026 first, and a future second. Remember how I said the Raptors' only path to improve was to get back a better player than you send out? Well, this is a roundabout way of doing that. The Indiana Pacers were in playoff position when the trade was made, so value-wise the pick move for Ingram was likely in the early 20s, where role players are typically chosen. Certain things have transpired since then, and the pick is likely more valuable than it was at the time, but you can't judge a trade with hindsight. The Raptors identified Brandon as a player who could return to his all-star form in a new situation, and I like the fit next to Scottie Barnes and Emmanuel quickly. Buying the dip on Ingram did come with another cost, and it's important to consider that. The $120 million contract extension he signed with the Raptors is slightly above his market value, but as a guy who averaged 23, 5, and 5 the last 5 seasons, he doesn't have to play outside of himself to return positive value. Next season, he'll be the 43rd highest paid player in the league by average annual value. I'd say that's worth it for a player you expect to be your number 1 scoring option. Ingram is leaving behind a dysfunctional Pelicans organization and an unreliable co-star. Most importantly, he'll be in the hands of one of the better medical staffs in the league that can hopefully mitigate any injury concerns, which according to former Pelicans was not the case in New Orleans. Fit-wise, there's lots to love about Ingram. He's a high-character guy who should fit nicely next to Scottie's playmaking and is a willing mentor to younger players. We've seen Trey Murphy III be a beneficiary of that in New Orleans, and I expect a similar experience for Raptors players Grady Dick and Jacoby Walter. Recently, we've seen the Suns, Heat, Mavericks, and Pacers pull off similar buy low moves that skyrocketed their teams to the finals. The expectation for Ingram is significantly lower. The Raptors just want to get back to the playoffs, a feat which should be possible in a weakened Eastern Conference. Ultimately, the Ingram deal will be judged by two factors: how far he can take the Raptors squad this year, and where that pick ultimately lands. For now, it serves as a signifier that the Raptors' days of buying high and selling low are hopefully in the past. In the words of Lethal Shooter, they understand it now.